I don't think anybody could dismiss Donald Trump at this particular moment in time, not just because of him, but because of what we've seen the Democrats do. We're not falling for it any longer. The American people aren't falling for it any longer. I voted Democrat, and I got to tell you something right now. I don't like the fact that I did.
Stephen A. Smith recently went on the Mark Levin show on Fox News and was asked a very, very interesting question. But before we dive in, make sure you stick around to the end as I give my beliefs as to the possible repercussions that could be facing Stephen A. Smith as a result of what he said. Let's dive in.
Welcome back, America. Stephen A. Smith. So could you see yourself seeing what you see now? And obviously, Donald Trump can't run for president again, but if he could, under the current circumstances, could you see yourself voting for him?
Quite possibly. I'm not going to sit up there and dismiss that anymore. I think we're beyond that. He would have to prove a lot, Mark. And I'm not talking about policy now for a second. Allow me to say this. What concerned me about Donald Trump and the reason I voted against him and voted for Kamala Harris was because I felt that he would be divisive, that he would create chaos because he demands such a level of loyalty and fealty to him.
Now, let me just comment here. I hear Stephen A. saying this a lot, and I do want to give him credit because he's being a little more open and honest about his personal opinion. But I think that's partially due to the fact that now, as I've said before, and I've heard other people say as well, that now to say that you are a supporter of Donald Trump, it's now kind of culturally acceptable. The coast is clear now. Those of us that supported him back in 2016, 2020, it was a completely different ballgame. You were ostracized, vilified for saying that you supported this man. But now that we had 4 years of Trump, 4 years of Biden, and we saw their radical policies, and now voting for Donald Trump ain't that crazy anymore. But it's a lot easier nowadays to say that than it was before. But the area that I want to push back on is him saying that he thought he would be more divisive. But at the same time, Stephen A. will say that he understands that the left was extremely radical in their views with the transgender push, the wide open borders, soft on crime, and all the other crazy issues, defund the police that they pushed in the past or currently. And then knowing Kamala Harris, she was the border czar. She had some of the most extreme views of anybody on the left. But somehow, and he acknowledges that, but somehow he thought Donald Trump was going to be the most divisive. It just doesn't add up. It simply doesn't add up to me.
And that would take priority over governing our nation. That was my concern. And so I'm looking for both sides to work across the aisle from one another. Having said that, when you see some of the things that he said, if he follows through on some of the things that he has said, it's not just about eradicating inflation, improving the economy, obviously controlling our borders. These are all things that I care about. Make no mistake about that. And I certainly would support him in that regard. But it can't be just about fealty to him and loyalty to him. It has to be about getting the job done on behalf of what's in the best interest of the American people.
And another thing, what politician doesn't want people who are loyal to them in their cabinet, especially considering all the backstabbing and behind his back politicking that was going on in his first administration? Every politician wants people on their side, on their team, who are in agreement with them. That's not weird to ask. I wouldn't expect differently from the other side. And I mean, I would hate their policies if Kamala Harris had been elected president, but that's what every president wants. Stephen A., like I said, I'm thankful that he's a bit more open-minded when it comes to examining these issues. But at the same time, I'm asking him to be a bit more consistent. If you want to examine the right a bit more firmly, which you have every right to do, and you should also hold that same bar to those on the left.
As opposed to yourself, and not engaging in the kind of juvenile tendencies, tweeting all the time and going after people who are really much irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. You do things like that and you show that you're the adult in the room. Yeah, I don't think anybody could dismiss Donald Trump at this particular moment in time, not just because of him, but because of what we've seen the Democrats do. We're not falling for it any longer. The American people aren't falling for it any longer. I voted Democrat, and I got to tell you something right now. I don't like the fact that I did. I don't like what I'm saying. I don't want to hear about, oh, we're about law. We're about a law. Nobody's above the law. Nobody's above the law. But then you go out and you pardon your son and you try to blame everybody else for it. I don't want to hear about defund the police. I don't want to hear about, what there should be open borders. I don't want to hear this stuff. And I don't think most of the American people want to hear that. We're thinking about the state of affairs that's in. We're not about America only, but being about America and prioritizing what's going on in this nation with the desolate and the disenfranchised and everybody else in between, and looking out for the best interest of what it is for America. That is not a crime for an American politician or commander-in-chief or a senator or a congressional figure to have that mentality. I want them to have that mentality.
So back to the fact that you voted Democrat. Why? Why did you vote Democrat? Considering that you are unashamedly a capitalist, considering that you like America, the concept of America first, that you want secure borders. You live in New York, or at least you're from New York. You see all the chaos going there with the illegal immigrants. You see all the chaos going around with them being soft on crime. But somehow you saw, just like everybody, that Kamala Harris was the border czar and did nothing, that she was the cause of all the problems. Economically, Biden was there. Kamala Harris was right there, involved in our economy failing. Now, I know you're not impacted like us regular folk, but you saw and you heard the impact that it had on your average everyday American. But somehow you justified your support for Kamala Harris. I just don't understand that at all.
So I think about things along those lines, and I'm no longer interested in, nor do I believe any of us should be interested in listening to a bunch of fear mongering to tell us who we shouldn't vote for. Why don't you come up with a plan that tells us why we should vote for you? That's what I'm interested in. And if Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Byron Donald, Marco Rubio, or the host of other Republican candidates coming down the pike, that's the kind of message that they're going to put forth. I'm down for it. I'm open-minded enough to make sure that I entertain that from a policy perspective. That's what I want for the American people. That's what I want for this nation.
Areas where he might need to be concerned, as he responded to Mark Levin, that he might be open in the future, or hypothetically speaking, to voting for a Republican or even Donald Trump if he had to do it all over again. The area I felt is that where he might need to be concerned is the fact that he works for what has been, especially over the last few years, a very progressive network in ESPN owned by Disney. All you have to do is look at the body of work over the last 5 years or so coming from Disney, the trash, honestly, the ultra woke garbage. Especially me as a former MCU fan, all the LGBT radical push that they've been putting out, and a lot of the anti-Trump and anti-conservative messaging that they've been promoting. And I know, or at least I've heard, that he's seeking to renegotiate his current deal, or he's looking to sign a new contract. That could be an issue with them, for all I know. Here he's being very open in saying that he would consider voting for a Marco Rubio, Byron Donalds, J.D. Vance, somebody like that. So who knows how they may feel about that. A few years ago, people like Sage Steele were basically booted out of their company, booted out of ESPN because they didn't have the right political views. Maybe the company as a whole has tried to course correct. I don't know, because they saw where the market was going. The market was going against them. The election clearly demonstrated that, with the entire nation as a whole shifting mostly red. That's something that could come and bite Stephen A. in the butt, for all I know.
What are your thoughts on Stephen A? Do you think he's just being more open? Now, he's been a pretty blunt dude as long as I've followed him. I used to watch First Take all the time until they went all ultra woke and they were debating political and racial issues on a sports show, a show that was supposed to be a sports show. They totally lost my interest. I haven't watched them in years. But what are your thoughts? Do you think he's just jumping in now that it's safe? Or do you think that he's legitimately reconsidering his politics? Comment down below. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you appreciate content like this, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next video.